I found my neighbor's basement key hidden under my doormat 3 weeks ago. The same neighbor who'd been missing for 6 months. And when you hear what I discovered in that basement, you'll understand why I'm moving out of this neighborhood forever. My name is Chris, and I've lived at 1247 Elm Street in Riverside, Oregon for the past 4 years. It's one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on, and where the biggest excitement is usually the annual block party in September. My next-door neighbor was a man named Robert Kellerman, 62 years old, retired postal worker, lived alone in a modest 2-story house with a well-maintained front yard and a privacy fence around the back. We weren't close friends, but we had that polite neighbor relationship. Waved when we saw each other, made small talk about the weather when we were both getting our mail. Robert was the kind of guy who kept to himself but never caused problems. No loud music, no parties, kept his property clean. The perfect neighbor, really. Which is why it was so strange when he suddenly disappeared in March. I first noticed something was wrong when his newspapers started piling up on his driveway. Day after day, the delivery kept coming, but nobody was picking them up. After a week, I walked over and knocked on his door. No answer. I tried calling his name, looking in the windows. Nothing. I called the police for a wellness check. 2 officers came out, looked around the property, knocked on doors. Robert's car was gone, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The officers told me it wasn't uncommon for older people to suddenly decide to visit family or take trips without telling neighbors. But something felt off. Robert was a creature of habit. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd come out in his blue bathrobe to get his newspaper and water the plants on his front porch. Every evening around 6 p.m., I'd see the glow of his TV through his living room window. Routine was important to Robert. He wasn't the type to just disappear. The weeks turned into months. Robert's lawn grew wild. His mailbox overflowed until the postal service stopped delivering. The city eventually came and mowed his grass, but the house just sat there, empty and lifeless. Ain't damn? That's when the strange things started happening. It began in late May. I'd be in my backyard grilling dinner or reading a book, and I'd catch glimpses of movement in Robert's house, just brief flashes in the upstairs windows like someone walking past. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just shadows from the trees, or maybe reflections from passing cars. Old houses play tricks on your eyes. But then I started hearing sounds at night, soft bumping noises coming from Robert's house around 2 or 3 a.m., like furniture being moved around. I'd lie in bed listening, wondering if someone was squatting in the empty house. But whenever I looked out my bedroom window, the house was completely dark. In June, I saw lights. Not bright lights, but the soft glow of a flashlight or candle moving from room to room. Always late at night, always just for a few minutes at a time. I called the police twice, but by the time they arrived, the lights were gone and there was no evidence of a break-in. The officer who responded the second time was a young guy named Martinez. He was patient with me, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Look, Mr. Thompson," he said, "empty houses sometimes attract transients or kids looking for a place to party. We'll keep an eye on the property. But unless you see clear evidence of criminal activity, there's not much we can do. That's when I started keeping a journal. July 3rd, 2:17 a.m. Light in upstairs bedroom for approximately 4 minutes. July 8th, 11:43 p.m. Heard what sounded like footsteps on Robert's back porch. July 15th, 1:55 a.m. Saw figure pass by living room window. July 22nd, 3:08 a.m. Sounded door closing, but couldn't determine which door. The entries went on and on. Night after night, something was happening in that house. But the thing that really got to me was the smell. In late July, during a particularly hot week, I started noticing an odor coming from Robert's property. Sweet and rotten, like garbage that had been sitting in the sun too long. It was strongest near the side of his house that faced mine, particularly around his basement window. I called the city's health department, thinking maybe there was a sewage problem or a dead animal under the house. They sent someone out to investigate, but couldn't determine the source of the smell. The inspector said it might be coming from the storm drains, but I knew it wasn't storm drains. I'd lived in this house for 4 years, and I'd never smelled anything like that before. August brought a heat wave that made the smell even worse. I started closing my windows and running the air conditioning constantly, but I could still detect that sickly sweet odor, especially at night when the air was still. That's when I noticed something else. Flies. Lots of them. Concentrated around Robert's house. More flies than I'd ever seen in this neighborhood. And they seemed to be coming from somewhere specific. On August 18th, I was watering my garden when I saw something that changed everything. A woman was standing in Robert's backyard. She was maybe 40 years old, thin, wearing a dirty white t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was stringy and unwashed, and she was just standing there by Robert's back door, looking around nervously. I dropped my hose and called out to her. "Hey, excuse me." She looked up at me, startled, then quickly disappeared around the side of Robert's house. I ran to my front yard, but by the time I got there, she was gone. I called the police immediately. This time, I had a clear description of someone who was definitely trespassing on Robert's property. Officer Martinez came out again, took my statement, and said they'd increase patrols in the area. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman's face. She hadn't looked like a typical squatter or drug user. She looked scared, desperate, like she was running from something. At 2:30 a.m., I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out my bedroom window and saw an old blue sedan parked in front of Robert's house. The same woman from that afternoon was walking up Robert's driveway, but she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, tall, heavy-set, wearing dark clothes. I grabbed my phone and started to call 911, but something made me hesitate. Instead, I watched as they went around to Robert's back door. A few seconds later, I saw the soft glow of flashlights inside the house. They were inside for about 20 minutes. When they came back out, they were carrying something. Something wrapped in what looked like a tarp or heavy plastic. They loaded it into the trunk of the sedan and drove away. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Whatever they'd taken out of Robert's house, it was heavy enough that it took both of them to carry it. The next morning, I found the key under my doormat. It was an old brass key, with a small piece of masking tape attached. Written on the tape in black ink was basement. My hands were shaking as I held that key. Someone had put it there deliberately. Someone wanted me to go into Robert's basement. Every rational part of my brain told me to call the police immediately. But another part of me, the part that had been watching strange lights and hearing unexplained sounds for months, needed to know what was in that basement. I waited until noon, when the neighborhood was quiet and most people were at work. I walked over to Robert's house, around to the back where there was a separate basement entrance. The key fit perfectly in the old wooden door. The smell hit me immediately when I opened that door. That same sweet, rotten odor I'd been smelling for weeks, but concentrated now to the point where it made my eyes water. I covered my nose with my shirt and stepped inside. Robert's basement was finished with wood paneling on the walls and industrial carpet on the floor, but someone had been using it for something terrible. There were restraints bolted to the support beams, heavy chains with padlocks, a camping toilet in the corner that reeked of human waste, empty food containers scattered around, and stains on the carpet, dark brown stains that I knew weren't spilled coffee. But the worst part was what I found behind the water heater: a wallet with Robert's driver's license, his watch, his wedding ring from his first marriage, and a small pile of clothes that I recognized: the blue bathrobe he wore every morning to get his newspaper. I stumbled backward and ran up the basement stairs, gasping for fresh air. My whole body was shaking as I realized what I discovered. Robert hadn't disappeared. He'd been held captive in his own basement for months. I called 911 from my house and told them everything. Within an hour, my street was filled with police cars, ambulances, and crime scene investigators. They found more evidence in that basement than I care to describe. DNA evidence, blood evidence, signs that Robert had been kept alive down there for weeks before he died. The investigation led to the arrest of Robert's own daughter, Patricia, and her boyfriend Marcus. They'd been holding Robert captive while they slowly drained his bank accounts and sold his possessions. The woman I'd seen in the backyard was Patricia. She'd been coming back periodically to clean up evidence and remove anything that might connect.